Hey everyone, I have a special guest on the line here, Mr. Bahjat. Welcome, sir. Good to see you.
Hey, how you going?
A
Likewise.
bunch of stuff has happened in AI today, and I'm also going to do a bit of shout out to the Tina IO team that are overseas at the moment. And we're recording this after Google first day of their I/O event, and a ton of stuff has been announced. This is like one of the biggest weeks in AI in history because Microsoft had an event this week, and Claude, which is the Anthropic people, they're having an event on Thursday US time. So I expect all sorts of news to come out of this week and all sorts of competitors that might drop stuff around this as well to sort of take away some of the news cycle that these guys have got. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some of the news items here, and I'm going to get Bahjat and myself and maybe give us our 20 cents worth, because the news items by themselves may be one thing, but what they actually mean for us in the community. So before I go into the Google I/O stuff, I want to talk about that a release from two companies. Well, I'm going to say two companies, but the companies are Windsurf and OpenAI. And OpenAI last week relaunched the Codex product, and I think a week prior to that, they announced that they're going to purchase Windsurf. And the other announcement was from Windsurf themselves that they launched a model called SWE-1, which is, and all of it's to do with coding. And if we dovetail in today's announcement from Google, they released a product, I think they call it Jules. Let me just double check on that. Um, and it is another coding agent. So these AI companies are big time going after code, Bahjat. What's your
Yep.
thoughts on the whole large language model and AIs generally and their big targeting of software and software development?
Well, I think what's happening is there right now is they they've done a really good job at making AI the new buzz, right? But what's happened is they're I think like the carriage is starting to get a little bit ahead of the horse, and so what they're doing now, OpenAI is doing, especially with this windsurf thing, and I've chatted with a couple other devs, is that they're positioning themselves akin to how Microsoft has already laid a lot of the foundation, because GitHub and Cursor, right? So Windsurf kind of behaves a little bit like Cursor. So they're saying, you know what, we're also gonna acquire something that's going to allow us to position ourselves as a kind of like a competitor to not necessarily vibe coding, right? But an AI, because they've got Copilot, right? Microsoft is Copilot. And so they could be positioning themselves to say, well, we have this AI model and we bolt it onto this kind of like coding model type of thing. Can we make ourselves a Copilot, competitor, right?
Well, that's the other big announcement that came out this week because of the Microsoft Ignite conference came out, where they've open sourced the big part of the VS Code, sorry, the GitHub Copilot as well. And a lot of this stuff is so very new that not a lot of people have used it and given us some really good feedback. But look, it's fair to say that we've now got a coding product. Well, we've got Cursor, we've got Windsurfer. So Windsurfer, we've got VS Code and the GitHub Copilot now going open source. We've got Google announcing this new, I think they call it Jules. Um, uh, and we have also seen some updates to the Claude code as well. Um, this is huge. The whole space is just amazing. And if you come back a step, Cursor announced, I think it was maybe 3 months ago, that they were the fastest growing startup, to fastest to 100 million reoccurring revenue, I think, in history, which means that people are engaging with these products more than ever. But what's the history? Sorry, not the, what's the history? What's the future in your view for coding and software generally?
Well, I don't think anyone's going to get replaced. I think what's going to happen is, and there's several different factors that are going into it, because since AI came out, you know what hasn't gotten as much uh, limelight recently is educational institutions, right? When AI first dropped, all of the universities and colleges and things like that were throwing their arms up, and they're talking about, you know, how are kids going to learn anything if they can't write an essay and they can't compose, and they, you know what I mean? Because it essentially gave them access to instantaneously create research papers and consolidate information, right? And so I think what's going to happen is that for them to stay relevant, right, and to be able to kind of like draw a parallel with what's going to happen next in AI, is that they're going to incorporate these, what would we consider junior type skill sets. So the co-pilot coding, the base coding that AI can provide for you, into new programming degrees, right? So that way graduates come out and they're already like, they've already been introduced to the notion of vibe coding or prompt coding and things like that. And then they come in, and then that's where they still, that's when they get into the company, there'll be the refinement into, you know, like really turning into a craftsman, really being able to understand things level on an enterprise level. But not only that, like being able to dive deep into code bases and things that are more nuanced and need that architectural importance. And it's just going to be a tool, right? But it's like, where's the tool going to end up being introduced to people, right? Because you yourself have been doing a lot of stuff locally, right? Because it's open source. So is it just going to be, we're going to migrate away from educational institutions and it's just going to be a tinker trade apprenticeship type of thing, right? Where you come in and it's like, we let you sit there and work on a research machine, cranking out prompts and code and things like that. Or if you, invest a little bit of money, can you just do that at home on your own and then build your own portfolio and say, walk up to a company and say, here's what I got, right? Like check out my repos and stuff like that. Because I'm from the film industry, and I saw the transition between tech and it being cost prohibitive and access to it. And so, the people who actually like got into Pixar and got into ILM and got into LucasArts and the really big kind of visual effects houses and stuff, is they just sat at home with their computer and hammer and tongs, 6 months, just built a complete custom portfolio, right? And then they put it out there. And they said, here's my capacity, like here's my capabilities and stuff like that. And generally that was the showcase, right? It's not, oh, I've just been turning the crank, for 5 years at this like production house. And that's why you should hire me.
Yeah, well, Google announced also today VO3. Now, VO3, like VO2 was already good. Sora from ChatGPT was sort of really put into their sort of baseline product a few months back, and it's pretty good. And Higgsfield, Kling, and a bunch of other people are launching these video type tools, and VO2 was pretty good, and they've announced VO3, and some of the examples I've seen online are damn good. And as a result of that, we spoke about coding, and because you've got a background in film and you've worked in Hollywood, what's your view on that industry and where that may evolve to as well?
Well, it's akin to, the idea of it taking anyone's job. Right now, if I was going to draw a parallel between video and image generation and currently the industry, it's the same as when 3D printers came out, right? Here you have a thing that has infinite possibility, but all people were doing were like printing out vases and cups, right? And like little toys and fidget stuff and whatever. And so it's taken a good, I'd say, a solid 5 years, if not a little bit longer, to where now they have the practical stuff, because the tech and the materials and then the community have kind of grown up together. And as a result, you have more practical applications where people can print custom parts for vehicles for repair, right? You can 3D print, what do you call it? Artificial limbs and things where things that used to be cost prohibitive are now accessible to people. And I think the same thing with the video and image generation is that it just has infinite possibility, but the community hasn't really kind of like gone around it, because there's always this notion of like, well, where does the novelty end and the practical application
Well,
start?
it's funny
Because
you should say that, because with all of these code tools that I'm seeing, we see all these examples of people writing things like Pong games, Minecraft, vibe coding a one-page website, but I've never seen anybody vibe coding a payroll app or an ERP system, or writing something that's really complex with business processes and stuff like that. I've never seen anyone do that sort of stuff. So it may make that stuff easier to get a POC or something off the ground, but nobody's on the internet now talking about these really practical stuff that people will use in, like enterprises and organizations. It may make stuff quicker and easier. So I suppose if you're drawing a parallel to the film industry, we're saying that this is the same thing, is that we're seeing these tools may make a pilot quicker and easier to, because I mean, just from a pilot, if you were in Hollywood back in the old days, what sort of money would you have to raise to get a pilot just for like a normal series? Be $1 million, wouldn't it?
Easily, actually. I mean, $1 million in the film industry is categorized as no budget, right? Yeah. So, in a lot of instances, that's barely enough to just do, the basic line items like catering and location and, right, like just pay for logistics. But more often than not, people are giving up their time because they're passionate about the script and maybe the people that they're working with. But with a pilot, it's going to be several $1 million, because the reality behind it is that you have the pilot, but you've also staged the next set of processes, right? So the idea is that you've got your idea, you've gone through several kind of iterations of vetting it before you launch, and then you're hedging your bets that it's going to stick. And once it sticks, you got to go, right? You got to be ready to produce the next set of like episodes and things like that. And I mean, with a lot of this stuff, it's like, yeah, vibe coding and stuff like that will make you can do hello world in a single prompt, right? But the next stage of that is like, well, do if even if you tack on, because there's a lot of MCP discussion now and agents, right? You yourself are using and it's saying, well, are we gonna include kind of like another layer of complexity where we're saying, well, we're delegating things to agents, but at the same time we still need overview or oversight. And I'm curious to see whether or not there'll be any kind of like guardrails, right, in the future from the different companies.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because yes, I have tried to vibe code something a little more than a Pong game, and yeah, it's sort of a bit problematic. And secondly, I am using this N8N, and there are other products around similar to that, where it's a workflow. It's not a true agentic agent that you just say, give it a goal. And then OpenAI had a product called Operator, and other companies, including Google, today launched a product that really tries to take it to the next step where these things take action. But to be truthful, they're vaporware. Like, I'm not going to go to an agent, whether it's N8N or Google's product today, and say, here's my credit card, book me a trip to Thailand, and all of the nuances of my preference, my budget, my available dates, and all of the 100 things that I look at when I'm actually shopping for something. I'm not just, I haven't been proven yet that there is these products out there that actually that are truly agentic. But
Well, the
workflows,
credit card thing is one, but you're also talking about like giving your username and sign in and stuff like that for
well,
all these
yeah,
different
yeah.
sites, right?
So what these agents are doing, like Operator and the product that Google announced today, is where these agents basically take a photo of your browser and can start to act on your behalf by clicking tabs and all this sort of stuff. And then you overlay the fact that if you're a big like a big box retailer, you may actually
Yeah.
have a preference for different suburbs getting different pricing, different incentives based on the cookies in your browser. There's a whole range of stuff that goes to human behavior that drives shopping behavior. And
Yeah.
they're trying to build stuff that gets around that, and it's quite difficult. And it's sort of working with a handful. I mean, they say, hey, DoorDash is now you can order stuff online, but DoorDash may be 0.001 of the services you may actually want to deal with, and all this other stuff. They're saying, okay, now we've got these MCPs. So what I'm sort of seeing in this agent space is in the next year or two, I still see these capable agents starting to be built where we are still in control. We give these things, goals by doing good prompts and the like, but we string all these actions together, and there will be always this human in the loop where we need to intervene to verify, validate, pay, because if I say, deep research, go off and search for me, and it comes back now, Google's got Notebook LM where, you give it a task and it goes off, and an American guy and an American girl tell you all about the subject, which is fabulous, and you listen to it like a podcast. Great. But now I need to take action on that, and that
Yeah.
action needs to be in the real world with all of these messy systems. And that is where I think that the next evolution of these things are going to come. Now, what we saw today with the Google I/O announcement was that they're taking steps. Now, we sort of got two big ecosystems. Actually, no, three. So Microsoft being the one that I forgot to mention, but Apple ecosystem, the Google ecosystem, which is Android, Android Car. I'm not sure that's the name of the product, but their car product. There's Samsung that do the watches, but it's an ecosystem. And some of the announcements today is how they're starting to build AI into there and doing what sort of Apple promised they would do with Siri, which is starting to learn your context. So it'll actually start to help you
Yeah.
write emails with knowing more about you and your past shopping behavior. And it's all very dystopian future because we give a lot of information to these browsers and there's so much information that's out there on us that
Yeah.
they could potentially take action on in all sorts of different ways. But all of the announcements today, you could categorize it into sort of those buckets, is that they're improving the way code is being written. And if you follow Javon's paradox, which means is that the more easily something becomes, the more ubiquitous it becomes. And instead of having one software piece of software that you write, you now can write 50. Maybe that's what's going to happen, and therefore there's going to be this need to deploy to the cloud and make sure that the code's right, write automated tests, do things that these software agents really haven't got. Same in film, and that's another big class. Google with music, video, and imagery is just standing on top of this industry that's just burgeoning and being just amazing, some of the visual stuff. And the third thing is that real personalization stuff. Um,
Uh,
on that personalization stuff, what's your thoughts on to understanding your context and then being able to have these tools act on it?
yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've seen. Listen, I've seen some of it, like, because I have a Pixel, Google Pixel. So it will, it'll bring up a prompt and it'll say, hey, there's this date on here. Do you want to add it to your calendar? We noticed that you typed something in your messages. Did you want to reply to it? Right. So it kind of like does very rudimentary secretary level things. And I think they're being very cautious about it because uh, as to not alarm people about how much information, right, that it's getting into. But the reality behind it is that all of these companies now are just data farming in this, like, corporations, right? It's as much information as you can pull in is how you can make more informed decisions, right? And so, and the scale that it's is growing at is astronomical. So in my head, my my takeaways, my questions are going to be, when are we going to see, where's the value add threshold where you just like, this is now useful for me to jump on board? And then second of all, has there been any kind of sustainability stuff, or is this just going to be like this unmitigated, uh what's the word, like resource, um vacuum, right? Because it's like data centers and GPUs and silicone and all of these different types of things and power stations, and it's like, all right, but that's, in my head at least, I don't want to be, boiling the ocean to get some pancake recipes, right?
Well, let me add to that, because I had a thought that the one thing that we've all seen, because AI has been around a while, and we all know that the social media, like the Facebooks and Instagrams and Twitter or X or whatever, their their primary monetization is through ads, and they are financially incentivized to attract attention. And they worked out that negativity gets more attention than positivity, and
Oh
saying,
yeah.
hey, and so they've got tons of data on us, and they probably know what inspires you and makes you happy and all that sort of stuff. But
Well,
they,
there's a whole thing now in marketing where people are saying it's not, we're not, especially in the film industry, or at least in the visual spectrum, is that, yeah, we know there's going to be elements of deep fakes. We know that people are going to use 11 labs and change people's voices and be able to just, of politicians and kind of like leaders and things like that. We know that they're going to play around with that, but the fabricated, um, the fabricated identities is where people are the most leery about it, right? Where you are on Instagram, you're going through reels and stuff like that, and you have someone who, for all intents and purposes, looks and sounds exactly like a human, right? And says, I was a doctor for 10 years and I did this thing, right? And it's just enough, right? Where, there's other YouTube channels that have done all kinds of surveys where they found out, just like you said, is that it's not necessarily aggression or it's negativity. It's that a half truth, right, will invoke more engagement than if you're just stating facts,
yeah.
right?
Well, okay,
And
so that's sort of my overarching point here, is that we know that you can fabricate media and have, your mum ringing you up and saying, "Oh, I'm short of money and I'm stuck somewhere. Can you wire me?" So that there's
yeah,
that element as well. But I'm just talking about more generally of these platforms with so much information, and obviously this big thing where the base of their incentives is engagement. And we're also, because the other thing is that Google, who is, basically was funded by ad business, now we're getting
yeah,
answers in the browser, and we're going off to ChatGPT and other AI engines to answer our questions. So companies like us and other retail companies that used to just be the river of gold back to Google, the old yellow pages used to be a very rich business. Now it's
yeah,
Google. That now is being disrupted. So they are now going to say, okay, what's our new monetization strategy? And the fact that they have so much data on us, are they
yeah,
going to give us these helpful suggestions that are going to minimize the amount we spend on these platforms? Or are they going to engage us to use these platforms more and use these dopamine sort of triggering things that are actually going to be negative? And, as it stands today, there's so much media out there about how negative Instagram and all these social media platforms for people's, personal mental health. Yet that hasn't stopped anybody or the lawmakers anywhere doing anything about it. And it's been driven by
yeah.
AI for 10 years. And we've,
Well, yeah. I mean, the reality behind that is, um, it is a double-edged sword, right? Because, uh, if someone creates a brand new Instagram feed, right? It's gonna have the most. It's gonna give you the bell curve, right? And you're gonna go there and you're gonna be like, this is garbage, right? All of this stuff is garbage. But like AI models, you have to train the app, right, to start thinking like you. And the way that they do that, and the number way they've done that is retention rate, right? So if you go down the spiral of watching something that like gets your blood boiling, right? The AI doesn't say, have I put a marker on this and said this is negatively affecting it? Am I it's not running the camera and looking at your facial expression to see whether or not it's a positive or a negative reaction to what it's been trained on. It's just saying this person is watching this material, right? And therefore it just ticks a little box and says more material, right? And so unless you train it or you actually tell it not interested, because I firmly believe that these companies are going to have to become more and more, because they have, again, like you said, they have so much data on us, and it's such refined data, right? Because it's hashtags, it's watch time, it's account types, and seeing that they're going to have to listen very closely to what people want. Why? Because just as fast as you can swipe to the next video, you can ignore an ad, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's true.
And
You know,
and so they have to work on catering things and employing things so that it it the way that you interact with your app is that it's built a way to where it's like it'll learn how to like the right time to approach you. Do you know what I mean? Like, when you're having a conversation with your, or you have a plan in your head with, and you want to go and talk to your partner about it. Like yesterday I was talking to one of the soccer dads and he needs a new computer. So I gave him a couple of suggestions. He's like, yeah, maybe I'll have a chat, or I got to pick the right time, in order to say, oh, can we spend $600 on a new computer? And I feel like with the data sets that are being built, that have been built up over years and things like that, is that I think it's going to start, especially depending on what your behavior is throughout the day, right? Because it's collecting 24 hours of data, right? It knows your uptime, it knows your downtime, it knows your most active time, right? And so it's going to start saying to itself, okay, where in this pattern, right? Because it's all about patterns, because we're animals of creature. We're animals of routine, right? Habits. And so where in this pattern can I suggest something? Right?
yeah. Well, it's interesting because if the whole ad model starts to shift,
It
then
has to, because the whole reality of, just because like it's like 30 years ago, everyone in the yellow pages who like started a business all put triple A at the beginning of their business name. Why? Because for some reason someone was convinced that people like just run up to the the phone book, yeah, and just like open the first page, and whatever's on the first page, that's the answer, because gall darn it, the pipe's broken or the toilet's exploded or the house or something, right? So who came up with the idea that putting triple A, just because it'll be at the beginning of, right, the phone book, thought that that was going to get them a better result over time, despite the fact that you're looking for, yeah, exactly, right? But
and
is that going
and people have been trying to game the technology and the systems for time immemorial. But I
yeah.
suppose is that we've got these platform companies that are sort of, the whole business model changes. And I suppose the point I make is that we've sort of seen how AI acting in social media isn't always our best angels. And I'll give you an example is that I was scrolling through YouTube one day and a pimple popping video came up. And I'm not someone that seeks that sort of entertainment out. Anyway, I just dwelled on it for a little bit. All of a sudden, I'm starting to that they feed me this stuff, and I'm
Yeah.
going, oh my gosh! And then it's sort of mesmerizing in a way, and I go, oh, I've got to get, I've because you just
Well, because they figured out how to hack the human brain, right?
and
And
and that's
so,
my point. Now we've got these things that are now platform wide. They're not just feeding us ads on Facebook and in Instagram and these social media. Now we're going to have these all-knowing apps that know our broad context, and the way that they monetize is they're either going to charge us for a monthly fee, which is interesting because you've got Perplexity over there. They'll
yeah.
search, they'll use some of the other language models for answering questions, but they want to charge you. So there's a free tier and there's a paid tier. So are we going to move to this thing where we pay and what we get in return is a product and a service that knows us and doesn't have to monetize on all these other strategies that hack our dopamine?
Well,
Or,
I'd say before we even get like to that is look at the streaming services, right? Everyone thought streaming services were just going to be this huge cash cow. Excuse me, this huge cash cow, right? Because they looked at Netflix, who categorically had cornered the market at the time, and said, "Oh well, we can we'll just digitize our stuff, and then people can pay for it." But they all knew because Apple posted that they are in huge losses recently, and they all knew that it was not a sustainable model. Right? Subscriptions would never pay for the insane budgets that these studios have. Right? So, but what they did do is they said we don't want to miss out on something, and they kind of like hedged their bets and said, well, one of us is going to figure it out, right? At some point, and then we'll just employ the same thing across the board. But it's not happening, right? They've spread things too thin, and I think that's what's going to happen with AI is that if you and here's a completely side note is that there's now like this cult of community that's basically saying we want to go completely analog, right? So there are people buying in like by the kilo, right, batches of DVDs, right, and just digitizing them, right, and turning them into archives. So movies, TV shows, all kinds of there's an entire repository for old video games and things like that. Why? Because we're seeing this subscription model going on, and now the latest thing that's got everyone in the gaming world absolutely furious is the new Nintendo came out, and you don't own it. You don't own it. You'll have a license to play the device, right? Even the games, so they sell a digital download, but they sell a physical one. The physical one is just a key code on an SD card. So you don't actually own the physical thing anymore, right? And they're like, and top it all off, the cherry on top is that if they consider you've tampered with your, right, with your Switch, which is this age-old thing of right to repair. Is like, I bought something, right? And so let's say something happens, something breaks. I just want to replace one component. I don't instead of buying an entirely new, right?
well, you know who did that?
Product.
You know who did that and really, really peeved their clients is Adobe. Adobe
Oh
used
yeah,
to, and
yeah.
they got a lot of people out of joint. And even now,
I
they're,
remember they announced it in Sydney, and
yeah,
people were like throwing tomatoes at the CO2, the
yeah, because
CO.
and so folks, for anyone that doesn't know, Adobe, who sell Photoshop and a range of other products, they're good products, and we've all used them for years. But years ago, you'd buy Photoshop, and you were offered the upgrade every year or so when they upgraded, Photoshop 8 to 9 type of thing. You were offered it,
Yeah,
and they'd sold it to you as a upgrade. Great, but if you choose not to upgrade, you'd still have your Photoshop. And what they did was over a period of time, they transitioned to this purely cloud-based model. And my
yeah,
Photoshop that I used to have, that I owned, no longer works. And you had no option but to go to the cloud. And it's an annuity. And if you buy the
yeah.
full suite of products,
It's like
it's
$1,000 a year.
$1,000 Australian a year. So call it
Yeah,
$700 or $800 US a year. And
yeah,
if you don't choose not to pay, let's say you're in between jobs or whatever, then all the access to all of your stuff and your creativity or whatever it may be is gone. Now,
Yeah.
I'm interested that Adobe's share price has, with all of this new technology and all, they are one of these companies that may be disrupted, like Google, like many of those things, and be interesting to see. But you've hit on something really interesting. Um, I'm going to pivot to one other piece of news that came out today, which is Google announced at their I/O conference, and I know that we've got Meta have got a product, and I suspect that this will just become ubiquitous with Apple have got a product, um, is glasses, where they've got
Yeah.
video
Yeah.
cameras within the glasses, feedback to your device in your pocket or the like, and they'll give you a feed on your phone, and they become immersive with your day-to-day life. Because now with image recognition, you can be looking at a computer and it'll tell you, oh, that's a Mac M4, or that's a rhododendron, or that's a lime bush over there. It will know
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. Augmented reality.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
going to start to talk with you. So this class of product, I mean, it opens up so many interesting and privacy
Well,
and gosh,
interestingly enough, so I actually worked with a Sydney-based company at the time. And when Google Glass first came out, they had I want to call it not necessarily a competition, but they had, this bid system, right? So what you do is you work with a company, you put together something, you pitch them a project, and if they like the project, they you get to get Google Glass, right? First off the line, and hang out and kind of like learn about it, and then get a set for yourself. And so we won that bid, and we played around with it and things like that, and it disappeared. Um, and initially there was a lot of questions about, well, one, privacy, two, security, right? Because even when Meta put out their, branded glasses and things like that, is that there's still this notion of, do you have to announce to the people in like a meeting that you have these glasses on, right? And you're going into somewhere that you potentially might be discussing sensitive information, right? Let
or change
alone,
rooms.
well, change rooms is one thing. It's one of those things where it's, we hope as humans we're decent enough to kind of like, have some common sense about that. But, like, is it going to be something where you get scanned or questioned if you're going to, a government building or a consulate or something like that, right?
And what if you have your prescription lenses in the glasses that also can potentially do the recording? Like there's a can of worms that go, well, I can't see now, and if I've got them on, I'm a privacy concern.
Yeah. And is there any kind of fail safes for that? Um, when can you actually like say, is there some kind of protocol that you can run? I think that something like that only I mean, I like the idea. Like a close mate of mine in Sydney, his actual senior project was all about augmented reality, right? I just don't think the tech, right, is sophisticated enough for it to be like as cool as Iron Man Jarvis thing, where you get projections and interactivity and it becomes this thing, because the overarching reality behind it is that some people don't know how to drive with their GPS on, right? Let alone, yeah, let alone, right, this entire like augmented field of view, right? And so for me, the silver lining is that I like that kind of thing because I record videos about me working on my project car, right? And if I don't have to like, get a camera set up and put a tripod and try to figure out how to get it into these weird locations, I can just put my glasses on and they see what I see, right? And then I can, you can go through and record it and have like a knowledge exchange as part of it. I find that a lot more useful because it's saying, well, how can we change the form factor of something that's functionally, uh, useful, right? But change the accessibility of it.
Look, every one of these announcements they're not unique in itself. They're just this gradual progression of all of these tools. We've got code, we've got voice, which is for customer service. So every single technology, and all of our tech overlords in the US are talking about this Javon's paradox of how this new capability is just going to explode demand for stuff. And I've heard equally as much negative comments about technology and disappearance of jobs and careers and the value on information. But in each case, there's a whole bunch of challenges that come, um, and upside as well. So, pair of glasses, all this upside. I know what this thing is. I can do what you say with my car, but then I can't see without them, and I walk into a change room. So now I can't.
Yeah. I think I think it's one of those things where we still haven't, and this is something that we talk about with regards to in the consulting world, right? Which is the 30,000-foot view, right? Is I think because AI is just is completely surrounding the societal zeitgeist right now, is that we need either one of two things, either more time, right, to be able to kind of like build that 30,000-foot view. Because ages ago, I'll give you an example. I did the bridge climb in Sydney, right, over the Harbour Bridge. And they tell you some of the history and stuff like that. And one of the interesting things that I found was that, because they built the arch, right, which they tell you is actually is the main supporting thing. The towers on the end don't do anything. They're purely aesthetic, right? So the arch is doing all the work. So they built that first because that's the structural framework. And then the council of Sydney got flooded with letters, angry mobs outside. How am I going to get my horse and carriage over this godforsaken thing? And it was like, wait, time out. We're not done building it yet, right? Like there's going to be a flat bit that goes across, right? And I feel like, yeah, exactly. And that's what I feel like AI is right now, is that everyone's trying to say, no, you got to start using it now. And I'm like, hold on, this part is difficult now, right? There's got to be a level playing field, right? That comes after that.
Well, look, you're 100% right. There is so much snake oil out there. There's so much half truths. There's so much these companies who are trying to raise funding that have got to have all this positive media. And there's so many people in the world, including all of us, that are looking at the capabilities of these things and go, gosh, what's my job going to be? What, is this good or it's bad, or is it a mixture of both, which most things generally are? There are people that are doomers that are saying that it's going to, transform all jobs out of existence, and then we need universal basic income to make sure that we can pay our bills. And then there's a million things going on at the moment, and it's why conversations like this. And yes, I think that's a great analogy to land on. That right now, we're seeing the hook of the bridge and we're not seeing the road through the middle yet. And I don't know whether anyone really knows what that road is going to be paved by and what's at the other side of the bridge.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to it. It's definitely exciting, but at the same time, I just want to say, don't panic.
Yeah, look, don't panic, because all of us are in the same boat. So, and before we leave, I'm gonna again another shout out to the Tina.io mob, the founder of SSW, Adam, and the guys are over in Oslo at the NDC, which is the Norwegian Developers Conference, I think. They're talking about Tina, another open source project it's a content management system that is backed by GitHub, Markdown. It's a great product for AI, because if all of your content is done in this format, you will be able to be found by Perplexity, ChatGPT, Google's new Gemini product, Claude, doesn't matter. The Tina product is pretty good. It's open source, so you can get started for free. So go say hi if you're in Europe and you're watching this. And again, I'm going to thank Bahjat for joining me on this call as we sort of try to navigate our way through all these big announcements that are happening. And I'm suspecting this, because we're recording this at lunchtime on Wednesday, and I suspect by the end of the week we may have even more things to talk about.
Excellent.
Thanks, Bahjat. Talk soon.
Bye now.
Cool. Bye.